Roz Alone is a pretty great episode of Frasier. I'm curious to know what other people think about something that happens towards the end, though. As I think I'm reading it correctly, but I'm not 100% sure, and I'd love to know if I'm kind of going down the right path. I'll discuss that when we get to the end. This is the 9th episode of the 6th season of Frasier. It's directed by Pamela Fryman, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the events of the episode chronologically and share some thoughts. And it starts off in Cafe Nervosa with Frasier on the phone buying a gold leaf candle snuffer, and then Roz comes in and Bulldog comes in. Unusual, not unheard of, but unusual to see Bulldog in Cafe Nervosa, which I quite liked. And for a moment, things are quite exciting, as it seems like KCL might be asking for them to come back. But then a waitress called Colette, played by Tricia O'Kelly, has overheard other people in the cafe saying that actually that's not happening and they're sticking with the salsa. I have to say I love Colette. I loved what she brought to this episode. I thought she was a fabulous character. And obviously the mood drops and Frasier insists on giving Roz Alone $1,500 because obviously Roz has a baby. Babies' things are expensive. That being said, even if she didn't have a baby, not working, your savings are going to dwindle pretty quickly. And Roz is very grateful. She accepts it. We'll come back to that in a second. We're then back at the apartment. Martin is sitting on his chair with an ice pack on Eddie's head, and it's just absolutely adorable. Daphne comes in and she mentioned just in passing that she saw Roz down at the spa. And obviously Frasier is a bit confused by this because Roz had very little money and obviously she had things that were important to buy, bills to pay. So why is she spending it on down at the spa? Spas are not cheap. And I think this does raise an interesting question, or perhaps an interesting debate, of if somebody lends you money because you're struggling, you're out of work, whatever the case may be, is it morally unacceptable to spend that on luxuries? I can see the other side. Life is hard. You don't have any luxuries. So treating yourself to a spa day or something else shouldn't be the end of the world. But at the same time, if you give somebody your money so that they can keep their head above the water and then they spend it on things that aren't essential, I feel like Frasier also has the right to be annoyed. And I think it raises a really interesting discussion. And if anybody has any strong opinions either way, I'd love to know what you think. Niles then finds out that Martin never actually used the spa gift certificate that he got him. And Niles is actually happy about this because it was originally for Martin and Sherry, and Niles can't afford that kind of thing just now because obviously the legal battles with Maris. So he encourages Martin to go to the spa with him. He can't go on his own because it's in Martin's name, so Martin has to go with him, and Martin finally agrees. I wish we got a little bit more out of that. Not that there was really room in it. There wasn't really room in the narrative for it to happen because I feel like everything else had a place, everything else had value. But I would have liked to have seen Martin down at the spa. I think that would have been quite funny and quite interesting. So I would have liked a little bit more out of that. But also, I don't know where we would have found the time in the episode because everything else did have value. We are then down at Cafe Nervosa with Niles and Frasier. Roz then comes in carrying a lot of shopping bags, and she goes off to, I think it was the bathroom, and Frasier obviously talks with Niles about this. She's spending this money so recklessly when she has, there's no job in sight, so she should be saving it. She should be spending it on important things. Again, if one were to argue a few luxuries here and there are not a big deal, but Frasier decides to rummage through the bags and realise they're not cheap things in those bags. And as Ross is coming back, he panics, he pulls away from the bags, he drops his keys in the bags. And, well, needless to say, Colette comes to his rescue. She's already ordered him a taxi. Rather enjoyed that. Back at the apartment, Martin and Niles come back from their spa day. And what we get out of it is good. We do get a little bit more out of that. But as I said, it would have been nice to see Martin down at the spa and what they got out of that. Frasier is still talking about Roz spending recklessly, and Daphne interjects and goes off on one about how she lent him $50 at one point. He's never paid it back. She doesn't go on about it. She's there using tea bags over and over again, which I have to say, is not just a good money saver. I think that's just a good tip in general. You can use your tea bags more than once. And then after her outburst, which everything she said I think was very valid, but then Frasier pointed out that he did pay her back because he paid a $50 parking ticket for her. So technically she owes him $10, which is not the way Daphne was expecting things to go. I also like the fact that it showed that actually Frasier does pay her back and he's not being a hypocrite, and I like that. But Daphne also says something that I think was pretty interesting. During her outburst, she said to Frasier, "It hasn't changed your life, has it?" Basically saying that Frasier lent Roz the money, but however she spends it doesn't actually change anything for him. Unless, hypothetically, Roz further down the line asked for a loan of more money, in which case, yeah, that would be a different story. But however Roz spends it, it hasn't made any difference to Frasier. If he didn't know about it, it wouldn't have changed anything, which I also think is a pretty good argument. And I think the episode does a good job of kind of showing both sides of the argument. The side where it's completely unacceptable with how Roz is spending the money, and the side where actually it's probably not the end of the world. And Roz then comes over, and Frasier wanted to talk to her. He was going to talk to her about her spending, but Roz brings him a gift. It's not just a gift to say thank you, it's a gift to celebrate returning to KACL. They've got their jobs back. Everything's fabulous. We're down at KACL. The atmosphere is happy. Everybody's obviously overjoyed. And just before they go on air, Roz remembers Frasier wanted to talk to her about something, and he happens to mention the spending, the spa day, the perfume, and the only way he'd know about the perfume is if he'd gone through Roz's bags. And Roz realises that's how his keys got in her bags. He didn't just, I don't know what he said, maybe he said he swiped them off of the table or something, but Roz realises then that he'd invaded her privacy, and she became really annoyed. She explains to him the spa day was a gift from her mother. Some of the stuff she bought was on store credit. Yes, the perfume was for her, and sure, one luxury in her life's not a big deal. Frasier goes on air, feels guilty, gives a speech about Roz, and Roz forgives him, and then Roz asks Bulldog for $1,500 because she wrote Frasier a check that's going to bounce. And this is the bit where I think I'm reading it correctly. Does this mean that everything Roz said wasn't true? Because when she said the spa day was a gift from her mother, things were on store credit, I thought, well, that's actually all very reasonable. I think those explanations make sense, and it makes Frasier look like the bad person. But does that mean that none of that's true, and that obviously she doesn't have the money still to give it back to Frasier? Or is everything she said correct? It was a gift, it was store credit, but she's then spent the money on other things as well. Which, to be fair, I think she should have spent the money on other things, such as things for baby Alice. But I don't know if I'm reading it correctly. Was she lying to Frasier? Or was that all truthful, forcing Frasier to look at it from a different perspective, but also she'd spent all of the money already in what I think is a matter of days? So I don't know. I don't know what I should be reading into it. I'd love to know what people think and how you read it and what you thought when Roz said that to Bulldog. We then end back in the cafe with Colette, and I rather enjoyed it. Roz Alone is a delightful episode of Frasier. If I had any personal highlights, I'd have to say Eddie with the little ice pack on his head. Absolutely adorable. And I think Daphne's saying it hasn't changed your life, has it? Because that, up until that point, I'd been completely on Frasier's side. If I'd lent somebody money for bills, for necessities, and they were spending it on things they really didn't need and things that were expensive, I would have felt the way Frasier did. But as Daphne points out, what difference does it make to me? And I think that's a pretty interesting turning point. And obviously, being back at KACL is in itself a highlight. So a really solid episode. Roz Alone is a delightful episode of Frasier.